Travel Talk, where our expert magical memory planners discuss ways you can have fun, memorable, and stress-free family vacations. Hi, and welcome to another episode of Travel Talk. So, I want to recap a little. So, in the last couple of episodes and months, we have talked about a few of the programs that the United States offers for travelers, their travel programs, things like TSA Precheck, Global Entry, and the CBP app. So, those are all things we've kind of talked about how they work and what they're for. But in this episode of Travel Talk, I kind of want to wrap that all together with some international travel tips. So we'll incorporate those programs into these. And if you need more information on what they are, why they work, how to apply, all that stuff, we have podcasts on that as well. But on this episode, we're really going to just talk about that whole process of international travel and give you some tips. So, we're going to start with the nonstop international flight. So, this is going to be when you're leaving the United States and heading to an international destination on a nonstop flight. And this could be going to the Caribbean. Maybe you're flying to Turks and Caicos or Barbados, or maybe you're heading to Europe for a river cruise. So, you're headed to Basel, Switzerland. Any international thing where you have a nonstop flight is where we're going to start. So the first step is going to be before you travel. And this could be done right when you book your trip. It could be in the research process, but ultimately it's going to be executed a couple of days before you travel. And that is the immigration paperwork. So some places, like in Europe, there's lots of places where you don't really have to do any immigration paperwork. You just take care of it when you arrive. And there are a lot of Caribbean countries that have really put it into a digital process and where you need to complete the immigration paperwork ahead of time, usually a day or two ahead. And you need to confirm that. And you get back like some kind of QR code or confirmation paper, and you need to bring that with you. So you want to look into that. And so step one is really getting that immigration paperwork completed before you depart on your trip. Step one. Step two is going to be about 24 hours before travel when you're going to do your online check-in. So just like a domestic flight, you're going to go to the airline website, you're going to put in all your information. But because this is international travel, make sure you have your passport handy and information about your trip handy. And you will need to put in your passport information. If you have a known traveler number for TSA PreCheck, if you have global entry, all that information you want in there as well. And you will complete your online check-in 24 hours before travel. Most of the time, this will allow you to get a boarding pass digital, or you can print it at home. There are occasions where it'll say you cannot. You must check in at the airport. This is not a reason to panic. This does not mean that something's wrong. My recommendations when you see that is one, to just go over everything again. Double check that all your information is entered correctly, your passport is entered correctly, the names and everything match, and everything looks good. Most airlines will kind of have a green check mark once all the information is entered correctly. So you'll want to make sure everything's correct, and then just give yourself a little extra time at the airport. There are a whole host of reasons why this happens, and I don't really even know what all of them are, but I know that once you get to the airport, you check in with an airline agent, everything's fine if everything's correct. So it can have to do with certain countries' requirements and whatnot. So most of the time you'll do that online check-in, whether you can complete it or whether it tells you have to check in at the podium or at the airline desk, that's fine. You want to do that 24 hours ahead. Okay, next up is day of travel. So we recommend getting to the airport 3 hours ahead for all international travel. You're going to check in at your international travel desk. So some airlines, I'd say at least more than half, have separate international check-in versus their domestic check-in. So you're going to want to make sure you're checking in at the right spot so that they are prepared for you and you're in the right spot. So you'll go to that international airline check-in desk. A lot of times there's kiosks where you can complete a portion of that check-in at the kiosk. I really love printing a paper boarding pass. For, again, a whole host of reasons. But if I haven't printed it at home, I will print a paper boarding pass. Some countries actually require it. So you have your paper boarding pass. You can usually tag your own luggage and get yourself ready to go. And then you'll go up to an agent there to check in your luggage. Now, whether you're checking luggage or not, it is important on international travel to talk to somebody because in most cases, they need to verify your documents. They need to make sure that your passport and everything is there. And they will either, your boarding pass will either say documents okay. There might be a stamp that they put on your documents on your boarding pass and you require a paper boarding pass, or they may put a little sticker on the back of your passport. Countries, airports, airlines, there's differences, but there's some indication that your documents are good to go. And it says documents okay. So even if you have a carry-on and you have a digital boarding pass, double check that you're good to go. So you're going to do that check-in at the airline, check luggage, all of that stuff. Next, you're going to head to security, which is going to be your typical TSA security. This is where TSA Precheck comes in. So even though you're doing international travel, you will benefit if you have TSA Precheck because you'll be able to use that at the airport. And when you go through your TSA experience, you are going to be using your passport because now that you are traveling internationally, you will need your passport for every leg of this trip. So don't worry about your driver's license or other forms of ID. It'll be passport all the way. So you'll head to your security location. Again, same as always, TSA PreCheck applies and use your passport are really the only two things. Head through security, head to your gate. Now, with international travel, again, I highly recommend get at your gate at least 30 minutes before boarding, or at least be within earshot, because there can be additional announcements, additional passport checks. If you did not get your documents verified properly, you might be on that list of names that gets called, and you have to be checking in and getting that figured out at the podium there at the gate before you board. So you'll just want to make sure you're hearing any of those announcements. So I really recommend hanging out close to that boarding gate, within 30 minutes of boarding for any of those final announcements. Then we come to boarding the aircraft. A little bit different than domestic. They are most likely going to want to see your passport, and they will take every person one at a time. They want all kids and every passenger to be holding their own passport unless they're really like a baby. Everybody's going to have to be holding their passport and their boarding pass. Sometimes they just want your boarding pass in your passport just so they can see that you have the book. Other times they're matching your name one last time before you get on that flight. So just, again, listen for those announcements, watch what other people are doing, see what questions other people have, be observant. You can usually figure out what you need to do by the time it's your turn so that you can get on quickly, get to your seat, and get settled. So this is kind of like that, that's your boarding your flight for your international flight. So now you've boarded your nonstop flight. Next up, you're landing in your international arrival. So for international arrival, it's a little bit different than a domestic arrival. First of all, you're in a new country, right? So if there was paperwork that needed to be filled out by hand, then that will be handed out during the flight. And the flight attendants will have that. Sometimes they have extra pens, so be prepared with a pen. You're going to fill out that paperwork. It's usually going to ask for all the details of your flight. So your flight number, the code of the flight, the arrival, the departure, all that kind of flight information. It's going to ask for hotel information. Where are you going? Is it business or pleasure? Is it leisure? Is it vacation? Are you there for business purposes? So you're filling out all of this customs information. Again, that paper boarding pass is super handy to have because then you could copy a lot of that information off of there, as well as your hotel confirmation. So if you need an address or information, if you're going to a big resort hotel kind of a situation, the address is pretty, you might not have the exact address. I've often just kind of put the main information, like when we went to Turks and Caicos, beaches, Turks and Caicos. I mean, it's not that big an island. They know where it is. So some of that stuff is kind of easy. If you're going to a villa or you've rented a home or something specific, you definitely need to put down the address. So you're going to fill out that paperwork. So coming into an international country, into a country when you're coming in internationally, is basically a 3-step process. So we're going to walk through that once you land. So the 3 steps, just to cap it out there, is immigration, then baggage, then customs. And this is on repeat. So we'll just talk through the nuances of that. So when you first land, your first step is immigration. And that's really where you get permission to come into the country. So you're going to wait in a line. There usually are bathrooms in and around there. If you can go before you get off the flight, that's awesome. But you're going to go through immigration. This is where you're going to present that immigration paperwork. So whether it's the paper that you filled out on the flight, or if you had a paper that you pre-did at home that has a QR code or a barcode or something you're supposed to present, this is when you're doing that. So usually you will go through immigration as a household. So if you're traveling with friends, you'll probably go through separate, but if you're going through as a family, you're going to go by household through immigration. When you get called up to the immigration officer, you're going to present all your passports for your family, the documents that they asked you to fill out per person. If there are documents, I like to put them all in the photo page because that's the page that they're going to turn to anyway. And they will look it over and they'll usually ask you some questions. So be prepared to answer some basic questions about your trip. Where are you coming from? How long are you staying? Are you returning? They often want to know about a return flight. Where are you staying? Again, great detail isn't necessary, but hey, I'm going to beaches, Turks and Caicos, or I'm going on a river cruise with Alma Waterways, or I'm going on, whatever you're in country for. They may ask, trying to think anything else, just some basic questions that you should know the answers to. And they just want to kind of know why you're there. They might ask if it's business or vacation, what that you're there for. And those are some basic questions. After they ask their questions and they're satisfied, they will usually stamp your passport, one of my favorite parts, although some places aren't stamping anymore, but usually they will stamp your passport, hand everything back to you, and send you on your way. So then you're off to step 2, which is baggage. If you checked luggage, this is the time you would collect your luggage. And then that is pretty self-explanatory. Check your tags, make sure it's your bag, basic things that you would do anytime you travel. And then you're off to customs. So customs is kind of where they look at what are you bringing into the country. And this process, I think, is happening a lot behind the scenes because it used to be a lot more involved than it is in most places now. So a lot of times it's kind of like 2 exits, and one will say nothing to declare, and then there's a place to declare. So declare is if you have something that you need to present to the country that you're bringing in. This usually has to do with items you might be selling, large quantities of money, certain, I don't want to say drugs, but like medications or things that you have to bring into the country that need to be declared. Usually not something vacationers have to declare, have anything to declare. So usually, I would say in most cases, vacationers are heading to the nothing to declare exit. And generally you just walk out. There could be officers with dogs that are sniffing around. There could be, people that do stop and ask you a question. So, be ready for anything. But in most cases, you're just going to exit through the nothing to declare, and then you've exited the airport, and then you move on to finding your transportation and moving on with your trip. So that's the basics for an international nonstop from leaving the United States and landing in another country. So the next step I want to talk about is if there are connections. So there's a few nuances to kind of think about if you have connections on your international travel. On your departure. And I'm going to kind of break these into 2 different types of connections. So you either have a domestic connection or an international connection. So we're going to tackle domestic connections first. So in a domestic connection, this would be where you have to connect on your flight and the connection point is still in the United States. So this would be like if I was flying to Barbados and I was connecting through Miami. So my flight would be Philadelphia to Miami, then Miami to Barbados. So my connection point is Miami, which is still in the United States. So you're going to kind of do a mashup. You're going to do some of those international. You're going to check in at your international desk. You're going to head to security. You're going to kind of go through that regular process. The only real difference is when you board the flight to Miami, not everybody is going international on that flight because there could be people going to Miami, going to a cruise, or just going to Miami. So, or connecting someplace else. So when you board that Miami flight, it's really going to just be a regular boarding, show your boarding pass, no passport needed, no driver's license needed. You'll just kind of exit and do your regular connection into Miami. And then when you get to Miami, you'll go to the gate like you would during a normal connection for Barbados, say, if in this example. And then when you get to that Barbados gate and you're boarding the flight from Miami to Barbados, that's when they're going to want to see your passport and kind of do like what we talked about in the beginning on the nonstop, because you're boarding that international segment at that point. Okay. So that's kind of how that's going to differ. But when you're going through the security and the check-in at the airport, because your final destination is an international location, you're going to use your passport and kind of go to the international desk and start the same. So the only real difference there is just when you board your first flight, which is really a domestic flight, they're not going to be looking at your passport. And then when you do your second leg, or whatever leg is the one that's going international, that's when they're going to have you look at your passport before you board that flight. Okay. So that's the difference there. The alternative option is that maybe you have an international connection point. My example for this is when we went to Switzerland and we went on a river cruise. And so we were flying to Basel, Switzerland. So we left Philadelphia and we flew to Frankfurt, Germany. And then from Frankfurt, Germany, we flew on to Basel, Switzerland. And so now we had a connection, but the connection was an international connection. It was in Germany. So when we did that, what we needed to do was when we landed in Germany, we had to do immigration because we're landing in a new country. We're coming in on an international flight. So not unlike Miami, we didn't just go from gate to gate. We had to do immigration when we landed in Germany, go through that process, and then continue on to Switzerland, which involved, again, like another international flight because we were going from Germany to Switzerland. Now, in the EU, things are a little different because some of those countries work together very well for travel. So we didn't have to go through another immigration when we got into Switzerland. But, normally you would, if you were going through countries like that, may have to do another immigration. And when we're doing these connections, either way, whether you have a domestic connection or an international connection, my recommendation is that when you check in at the very beginning and you go to the airline agent and you give them your luggage, ask them, where do you need to claim your luggage next? In most cases, on these international departures, regardless of whether it's a domestic or international connection, you won't have to get your luggage until your final destination. So you can ask, is this checked through to my final destination? And then you would see on the luggage tag, Philadelphia, Miami, Barbados, Philadelphia, Frankfurt, Germany, Switzerland, right? So then you don't have to get the luggage. So then when you're in that intermediary step with that international connection, you always do immigration. Anytime you enter a new country, there's immigration, but then you don't have to do baggage customs. You're just able to go on to the next gate. So you need to know, do I need to claim my luggage at that intermediary step or is it checked through to the end? Very good, important question. I travel all the time and I always ask because you never know. And I don't want to be moving on without my luggage if I was supposed to claim it. So that is kind of the nuances when you have those connections, whether it's an international connection or a domestic connection. So a little bit of a difference there. Okay. All right. So now we're going to talk about coming home. This is the part of the trip I never like to talk about. Who wants to come home? But anyway, so we do have to talk about. So now we're going to talk about the return flight. So coming back home at the end of your trip back to the United States. And again, we're going to start with the nonstop return, the simplest option, right? So in this scenario, your trip is ended, you're ready to come home. You are again going to do that 24-hour before departure airline check-in. This will be a little bit easier because you already did it on the outbound. So all the information was already in there and kind of verified. So this should be a little bit easier. Most of the times you can do it through the app. Sometimes you have to get on a computer. If you don't, again, just check in when you get to the airport. It's fine. But you'll do that check-in 24 hours ahead. If you don't have that completed, allow extra time at the airport. And still, it is recommended to be at the airport 3 hours before your departure for an international flight. So once you arrive at the airport, you'll need to get your boarding pass and finish your check-in. There may be somebody there again to ask questions. Where are you headed? Where did you come from? How long have you been here? Where did you stay? Did you go off resort? All these types of questions as you're leaving and heading out. Sometimes we'll get asked those questions while we're in line, waiting to go up and check in at the airline and check our luggage. And again, there might be some verification of your documents. Sometimes it's a sticker on the back of your passport book. Sometimes it's a stamp on the boarding pass. Okay. So with so many digital boarding passes now, sometimes they'll do a sticker on the back of your passport to know that it's been verified and matched to you. Okay. So you're going to go through that, expect that before, after. And again, the boarding pass might say documents okay. It might have a stamp. It kind of just depends. But even if you're not checking luggage, Again, it's good to stop at a desk and make sure your documents are verified before you head to security. Okay. So next up is security. Every country has their own rules on security, although they are generally similar. But you are not in the United States. So TSA Precheck does not apply. None of the US traveler programs apply. You are at security in another country. So security goes by whatever they say. Um, in most of the securities I've been to, it's kind of take off your shoes, take the electronics out of the bags, put computers in separate bins from your regular things. It kind of depends. Again, watch and listen, see what the officers are instructing, ask a question if you need to know. My big question is always my Kindle. It's not as big as a laptop. It's not as tiny as a phone. Sometimes they want it out. Sometimes they say leave it in. So I always have to ask, I have an e-reader, a Kindle, in or out. So you're going to go through that process of security, but just remember, you're in their country following their rules. When we were flying out of Heathrow in London, they had different rules. They provided bags to put your liquids in, they had different amounts. Everything was in milliliters, not in ounces. So I know my stuff is all 3 ounces or less, but then it was all listed in milliliters. So it's like, oh, I wasn't sure. So, again, whatever their rules are, that's what goes by. You're in their country. So you're going to go through their security process, and then you're back in the airport going to your gate. Again, 30 minutes before departure, be within earshot of your gate. They may have to verify documents, and we often see random screenings. I can't even tell you. I think pretty much every flight I've been on, they call up a list of names for random screenings where they just go through everything one more time. They ask you to unpack your carry-on and go through everything one more time. When we were in Europe, they asked everybody to verify their passport again with somebody at the gate. There was another spot to get it verified again. So you just be at the gate at least 30 minutes before boarding begins, not 30 minutes before the flight, 30 minutes before boarding for final announcements, final stuff. Earshot, make sure you know what's going on, what announcements are going on. Okay, so that is that. And then again, boarding the plane, passport, and boarding pass. When you're in international travel, when you're doing domestic, you usually just have your driver's license out at that first security checkpoint, you put everything away. When you're international, the boarding pass and the passport are together all the time. Keep your boarding pass in that front page where your photo is. So it's super easy to open and have together. Okay. So you've done security, you're at your gate, good to go, fourth flight, on your way home. Okay. So now you're arriving into the United States. This is when all your traveler programs kind of kick in again. Okay. So you're arriving into the United States, and it's an international arrival. So you have that 3-step process again. You're going to go immigration, baggage, customs. Okay. So first, you're going to do immigration. So when you land in the United States and head toward immigration, there are basically 3 ways to get through. One is the global entry. If you have that already on your passport, in your account, you go straight to global entry. If you don't, I highly recommend doing the CBP app. That is the Customs and Border Patrol digital passport. Still need your passport, but it's like a digital digital immigration form. There's another podcast on that. You can read about that or listen to that. Or you just go through the regular passport line. But you're going to come into the United States and you're going to hit one of those 3 lines and head your way through immigration. Then you're going to head to baggage. If you have any checked bags, grab your baggage. Last step is customs. On your way out, again, there may be somebody there to ask you questions. It may not appear that anybody's there. I guarantee you they are watching, and there's dogs, and there's things in place. You just might not notice it. But anyway, you'll head through customs, something to declare, nothing to declare, and hopefully you have nothing to declare. And you head out and you're on your way home. Okay. So that is the return to the United States. So let's talk about return connections. Coming back from your trip, if you have a connection, and again, we're going to break it down into the 2 different scenarios, either a domestic connection or an international connection. So first, a domestic connection. So let's go back to our first example of domestic connection. We're coming home from Barbados and we're doing the reverse. We're doing Barbados to Miami, Miami to Philadelphia, right? So we have a connection in Miami. It's a domestic connection. So on that domestic connection, we are going to go through everything that we would normally do because it's our first entry into the United States, okay? So we get off the plane. We go to one of the 3 lines for immigration. We will always claim our luggage. and then recheck your luggage. Head through customs, recheck your luggage. Then you are going to go back through security. Okay. So just to recap that, you get off the plane, you do one of your 3 immigrations, the CBP app, global entry, the regular line. If you have luggage, you're going to go claim your luggage, pass through customs. And then usually there's a spot right after that that says connecting flights. So one direction is exit the airport, one direction is connecting flights. You're going to recheck your luggage. It's usually tagged all the way through. So it doesn't have to go through tagging and you don't necessarily have to talk to anybody. It depends on the airport, different procedures. Sometimes I have to talk to somebody, there's just somebody there collecting it and I just push it, I grab it from the belt and I roll it over and I push it off to somebody else. They collect it and off I go. But either way, you're going to grab that luggage and resubmit it. It's already tagged to your final destination. So recheck your luggage and then you go back through security. Okay. So if you have connecting flights with the domestic connection from an international, traveling internationally with a domestic connection, I'll say it that way. TSA Precheck and then either CBP app or global entry are your friends. That will save you a lot of time with your connection. And that's why you see these connections are like an hour and a half, 2 hours when you're connecting domestically like that, because there's a lot of steps and a lot of lines. Okay. So you're going to go back through TSA again. If you have Precheck, go through the Precheck line. If you don't, go through the regular line. No liquids through TSA, right? So if you bought something or acquired something in this process, you're gonna have to throw it out. Okay. If you got something duty free in the airport, figure out what to do with that, talk to somebody, make sure you put it in the right spot. Learn from me. I had all of my duty free stuff thrown out in Houston when I was connecting through on my way back from Costa Rica. I'm not bitter. It's fine. I'm over it by now. Not really. So anyway, just find out about that. Okay. So then you're going to go through TSA PreCheck. And then after that point, that last leg, so in our example, Miami to Philadelphia, is essentially like a domestic flight. Everything will be the same. You don't need your passport to board the flight from Miami to Philadelphia. When you land in Philadelphia, you're coming into a domestic terminal. You just go claim your luggage and go home. You've already done immigration. All of that is done. Okay. So you're doing that process at your first entry into the United States. In this example was Miami. Okay. So that is an international return flight with a domestic connection. Alternatively, go back to the river cruise example, you are flying home, but you have an international connection. So when we flew home from our river cruise, we actually flew home from Amsterdam. So from Amsterdam, which is the Netherlands, we flew to Frankfurt, Germany, again, big hub in Europe. And then from Frankfurt, Germany, we flew to the United States. So from the Netherlands, from Amsterdam to Germany, again, EU, so they're very friendly, but we did have to go through immigration. Did not have to claim luggage. Again, ask at airline check-in, when will I have to claim my luggage next? Went through Frankfurt, did immigration, security again, and then back on our flight, had to verify our passports, travel, get them checked before boarding the flight. And then our flight from Frankfurt to Philadelphia, we did all of the normal international arrival things in Philadelphia, right? We did immigration, we did baggage, and then we went through customs. So with that international connection, we still had to hit immigration there. So essentially we went immigration twice. We took immigration when we went into Germany for our connecting flight, did a second security screening in Germany before we boarded that flight, and then again when we landed in Philadelphia. Okay. So the key things with the connections, I think in general, are knowing when you have to claim your luggage and when you don't, so that you don't leave it behind in a certain spot. Okay. And then knowing about all the immigration steps. Okay. And when we did immigration in Germany, international, no global entry, no TSA PreCheck, no CBP app, right? We were in Germany. Those things only work when you're on US soil. Okay. So if you're at a US immigration point on US soil, one of those may apply. If you were at a security checkpoint, an immigration checkpoint, any of those things, and you are not on US soil, none of them apply. Okay. But even though you're traveling internationally, because some of your checkpoints and some of your experiences will be on US soil, they do still help. Okay. So hopefully that helps kind of give you some information about the flow of international travel. So you kind of can be prepared and kind of think about what the steps are. Okay. So here are some just general tips for international travel while I have you. We'll go through these kind of quickly. But find out your arrival documentation for any country, because a lot of it can be digital and has to be done in advance. So you want to get that done, save yourself some time. Be aware of security protocols on any country that you are departing from. When you're at security lines in Barbados, Turks and Caicos, Germany, it's their rules and you want to follow them. So make sure you're aware they're not all TSA. They're run by their own governments. Okay. So make sure you know the security process for those other countries. Pack your medications, especially ones that are required that you need to take. Make sure those are in your carry-on or on your person, in case luggage gets lost or misplaced. If you have supplements or things that you take that are not things you have to take, you can put that in your regular luggage. But anything that is a medication that, do or die that you need to make sure you take and you take on time, make sure that's in your carry-on. Keep it in its original container with the prescription labels. Super important for that. Okay. Be aware that substances and medications, prescription or not prescription, either way, may or may not be legal in other countries. So it's very important that you make sure that whatever medications you have, even if you have a prescription for them, that they are legal to be carried in whatever country you're going in. Okay, supplements as well. Okay, because countries have different rules, and it's just important to be aware of what you have. And what you're allowed to have. Okay. And also be aware that things that they sell in other countries may not be legal in the United States. So you might buy something that's over the counter when you're in another country and think, oh, great, I was able to get this. And then have an issue coming through customs in the United States because you're not allowed to have it here. Okay. So also be aware of the differences of what's legal and what's not legal to have on your person. And you need to do that research yourself. People in that country will not know. One example I had was Cuban cigars. You can smoke them while you're international, but you cannot bring them back to the United States. And I actually asked one of the immigration officers, I said, I don't have them. I was afraid he was going to think that I was trying to sneak something in, but I was like, I don't have them. But the person selling Cuban cigars assured me that I was allowed to take up to 5 back into the United States, that was legal. I just couldn't take more than 5. And I said, I was under the impression that 0 were legal. I wasn't allowed to bring any. And the officer confirmed for me. He's like, yes, you are not allowed to bring any. 0. And I was like, okay, I'm glad. I just wanted to clarify that. I wanted to know. So the advice I was given by the person who's trying to sell me something was not accurate. They're not responsible for you. Make sure you know the rules of what you're allowed to bring back into the country when you are traveling. Both ways. Okay. Keep copies of your passport photo page. That has all your important information, your numbers and everything like that. If your passport was to get lost or stolen and you needed to report it, file a police report, go to the embassy, get new paperwork, having a copy of it will be very helpful because all of the important information is there that they need in order to reissue or get you new documents. I mean, you can't travel with a copy, but it is very helpful to have that on your person. So get copies of the photo page of your passport and keep it separate from where your passport is, but in a very safe location. Okay. Check your credit cards for foreign transaction fees. You don't really need to pay extra for foreign transaction fees. So be sure you know which credit cards are good to travel with. And if you need to put any travel alerts on them when you're traveling internationally, you do not want to be out of the country and not have access to the funds that you need. And then lastly, bring local currency with you. A lot of places in the Caribbean take US dollars and they're fine with that, but not everywhere. So be aware of what the local currency is and be sure that you have some with you. And you can also get it. I always get mine at my bank. I can go in, some of it they keep in the vault and some of it they have to request, and I have it within a couple of days. But just be sure that you get the correct money that you need and have some cash on your person that is good for that country. Okay. Next, become familiar with using Google Translate and learn some basic phrases in the languages that you're going to be encountering. So, whatever country you're in, it's good to know some basic language and then be very comfortable with using Google Translate. Have a conversation with somebody at home using Google Translate, because if you're in a situation where someone's hurt or you're anxious about something not going right or you're lost, Google Translate will really help you have that conversation that you need to have. And if you're flustered already because of the situation, you don't want to be trying to use a new app. So learn how to use Google Translate. It can be a lifesaver when you're traveling and you really need to communicate something with someone. Take note of baggage size and weight requirements. International travel can be different than domestic travel, even with the same airlines. So just take note of the size of the bags, what is allowed. Domestically, I don't think of anybody has an issue with weight on a domestic carry-on. But for European travel, sometimes there are requirements for weight for even the carry-on. So just be aware of those differences. Don't take it for granted. Just double check that you have the right weight and size for your luggage. And lastly, have a communication plan with the people you're traveling with and your people at home. So when you're traveling internationally, there may be a travel pass you can put on your cell phone that will allow you to call internationally for a flat rate. That might be a great option for you. You may also look at an web-based app like WhatsApp, where you can use Wi-Fi to call and text while you're traveling over Wi-Fi. So those are just two options that I usually use is either WhatsApp or my international call plan. But just have a communication plan in place, find out where you're going, what you need, and make sure you have a plan in place so that you don't get stuck, okay? So those are some international travel tips, and I hope you find it helpful to kind of go through that process of international flights so that you kind of have an idea of what to do and where and when it will work. And again, check back on those other podcasts that we had on the global entry, the mobile passport with the CBP app, and then also TSA Precheck so that you know how to use those services if you want to add them. All right, so thank you for joining us on Travel Talk. We'll talk soon.